Young woman vanished in 2018. 5 years later, a drone captured something no one can explain. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. The morning of her disappearance started like any other morning in the small coastal town where she'd spent her entire life. The smell of salt air mixed with fresh coffee drifted through the family inn where she worked, where generations of her family had built their lives around fishing boats and tourist season. She was 28 years old, the dependable daughter, the one who stayed when everyone else left. That Tuesday morning in 2018, she woke before dawn. Her hands moved automatically through the routine, making breakfast for the inn's guests, folding linens that still smelled of lavender detergent, smiling at strangers while her mind drifted somewhere far away. Nobody noticed anything different about her that day. Nobody saw the backpack she'd hidden in her car the night before, carefully packed with supplies she'd gathered over weeks. Her phone sat charging on the kitchen counter when she left. She didn't take it. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She simply walked out the back door while her parents argued about finances in bitter, tired voices that had become the soundtrack of her life. The hiking trail she chose was one she knew by heart, a path she'd walked 100 times since childhood, where pine trees stretched toward gray skies, and the sound of her footsteps on packed dirt was the only company she needed. But this time something was different. This time she had coordinates memorized, a destination that pulled at her like gravity. By nightfall, when she didn't return, her family called the authorities. Search teams arrived with flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices echoing off canyon walls as they called her name into the void. Dogs picked up her scent along the trail, followed it for 2 miles, then lost it completely, as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks. Volunteers combed every inch of the mountainside. Helicopters circled overhead. Her face appeared on missing persons posters in every shop window, her smile frozen in time, her eyes looking at something beyond the camera. The police found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, nothing that explained how a woman could disappear so completely. Months dissolved into years. The case grew cold. Her family held memorial services without a body, their grief suspended in terrible uncertainty. The town slowly stopped talking about her, the way small towns always do when tragedies become too painful to remember. But what if she didn't want to be found? In 2023, 5 years after she walked into those mountains, a wildlife researcher's drone captured something impossible. The footage showed a hidden valley that shouldn't exist on any map, a place where hand-built cabins blended seamlessly into the wilderness. And there, standing in a clearing surrounded by gardens and structures that spoke of years of careful work, was a figure that looked impossibly familiar. She was looking directly at the camera, almost as if she'd been expecting it. What happened in those 5 years? And why would someone choose to vanish from their own life? To understand why she vanished, you need to understand who she was before that Tuesday morning, and what investigators discovered about her life would make everything even more complicated. She was the daughter who never left. While her siblings scattered to distant cities chasing dreams and careers, she stayed in the coastal town where she was born. She worked at her family's inn, a 3-story building that smelled of old wood and sea salt, where tourists came to escape their lives while she remained trapped in hers. Her parents described her as empathetic, almost painfully so. She absorbed everyone's problems like a sponge soaking up water. The guest crying in room 204 about her divorce, the neighbor whose son was struggling with addiction, her mother's endless anxiety about money. She carried all of it, every piece of pain, until her shoulders ached with the weight of sorrows that weren't even hers. Friends said she was determined, stubborn even. But that determination had turned inward, becoming a weapon she used against herself. When she couldn't fix someone's problem, she blamed herself. When the inn struggled financially, she worked longer hours, slept less, pushed harder, as if sheer willpower could save a sinking ship. But there was something else. Something her family didn't talk about in those first interviews with police. Something that would only come to light months later, when investigators dug deeper into her final weeks. 6 months before she disappeared, she found a letter. It was tucked inside an old library book, yellow with age, written in her grandmother's handwriting. The grandmother she'd been raised to honor, the woman whose portrait hung in the inn's lobby, whose memory was treated like a saint's. The letter revealed a secret that shattered everything she believed about family and sacrifice. Her grandmother had wanted to leave this town once. She'd dreamed of becoming an artist in a distant city, had plans, had hope, but the family had convinced her to stay. Slowly, systematically, they'd discouraged those dreams until they withered and died. Reading that letter, she saw her own future written in fading ink. Was history repeating itself? Was she becoming another woman whose dreams would be sacrificed on the altar of family duty? 3 months before the vanishing, something stranger began happening. She started experiencing episodes where time seemed to skip. She'd be folding sheets in the laundry room, and suddenly she'd find herself standing in the garden with no memory of walking there. Dirt under her fingernails, hands trembling, heart racing with unexplained panic. A local doctor examined her, ran basic tests, and dismissed it as stress. "You need rest," he said, scribbling a prescription she couldn't afford to fill, and advice she couldn't afford to follow. In their small community, showing weakness was dangerous. Admitting you needed help was seen as failure. But her younger sister noticed, and instead of offering support, she saw opportunity. The sister began spreading whispers throughout the town. Careful, concerned whispers about instability, about erratic behavior, about whether she was really capable of managing the inn. Each whisper was a small knife, cutting away at her reputation, positioning the sister as the more reliable daughter. Nobody knew that the sister's motivation wasn't just concern. It was jealousy wearing a mask of care. It was the fear of being second best in their parents' eyes. It was years of resentment finally finding a way to surface. Then came the wedding invitation. Elegant script on cream-colored paper. Her former fiancé, the man she'd left 3 years earlier because she was suffocating under everyone's expectations, was marrying her childhood best friend. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone realized. Not because she wanted him back, but because it confirmed her darkest fear. She was so forgettable that even the people closest to her could erase her and move on as if she'd never mattered. Was this the moment she decided to disappear? Or was there something else, something even darker, pushing her toward that decision? 1 month before she disappeared, something happened that would change everything. But nobody connected it to her vanishing until years later, when the pieces finally started coming together. An elderly woman checked into the inn. She arrived on a rainy afternoon, her clothes slightly worn but clean, her eyes carrying the kind of wisdom that comes from living outside society's normal boundaries. She booked room 307 for 2 weeks, paying in cash, asking for nothing but quiet and a window facing the mountains. Most guests came to the coastal town for the ocean views, the fishing charters, the tourist attractions. This woman barely glanced at the sea. Every morning, she sat by her window with tea growing cold in her cup, staring at the mountains in the distance as if they were calling to her. She and the protagonist began talking during breakfast service. Small conversations at first, comments about the weather, the quality of the coffee, the beauty of the landscape. But gradually, those conversations deepened into something else. The elderly woman told stories about a place in the mountains, 3 hours north, where people lived differently. She described it with details so vivid, they felt like memories being planted directly into the protagonist's mind. Morning mist clinging to hand-built cabins, gardens where residents grew their own food, art created from natural materials, clay from the riverbed, dyes from plants, wood carved during long winter nights. "There's a healing that happens when you step away from the noise," the woman said, her hands wrapped around her teacup. "When you stop living everyone else's life and start living your own." The protagonist felt something crack open inside her chest. Was this real? Or was this woman simply a lonely elder sharing fantasies? She started researching late at night, after the inn's guests had gone to bed, and her parents had retreated to their separate corners of disappointment. She discovered that the community did exist. They welcomed people seeking temporary refuge, no questions asked. They practiced intentional living. Every resident contributed skills while having space to heal and discover themselves. The more she read, the more it felt like finding a map to a place she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it existed. But there was something the elderly woman didn't mention in those breakfast conversations. Something the protagonist wouldn't discover until much later. The community wasn't just a peaceful retreat. It was part of something bigger, something that existed in the shadows between society's rules and complete isolation. In her final week at the inn, the elderly woman gave her something. A small piece of paper with coordinates written in careful handwriting. No address, no name, just numbers that would lead to a trailhead, and then beyond, to a place that didn't appear on any official map. If you ever need to find yourself, the woman said, this is where lost people go to become whole again. The protagonist tucked the paper into her pocket. She didn't know if she'd ever use it. She didn't know that in less than a month, those coordinates would become her lifeline. The night before the elderly woman checked out, something strange happened. The protagonist was closing up the kitchen when she heard voices coming from room 307. Not one voice, multiple voices, men and women speaking in low, urgent tones. She stood outside the door, her hand raised to knock, her heart pounding with inexplicable fear. The voices stopped. The door opened. The elderly woman stood there alone, her face calm, her eyes knowing. Sometimes, she said softly, we have to die to the life we're living in order to become who we're meant to be. She left the next morning. The protagonist never saw her again. But she kept the paper with the coordinates. She kept it hidden in her pocket like a secret promise, like an escape hatch she wasn't sure she'd ever be brave enough to use. 2 weeks later, the wedding invitation arrived. 1 week after that, she packed her backpack. And on that Tuesday morning, she walked into the mountains carrying those coordinates like a key to another world. But was she walking toward freedom? Or was she walking into something far more complicated than she could have imagined? The morning after she vanished, the search began with hope. By the third day, that hope had turned into something darker. Confusion mixed with dread. The kind that settles in your stomach like ice water. Her father was the first to notice she was gone. He woke at 5 a.m. for his usual routine, walked to the kitchen for coffee, and found her phone sitting on the counter, still plugged into the charger. The screen showed 17 missed calls from the night before. Guests needing extra towels, her sister asking about breakfast schedules, a friend wondering if she wanted to meet for coffee. She never ignored her phone. Never. It was practically an extension of her hand, always within reach, always answered. Seeing it abandoned there, silent and fully charged, sent panic racing through his veins before he even checked her room. Her bed was made with military precision, sheets tucked tight, pillow perfectly centered. But when he opened her closet, he noticed gaps. Her hiking boots were gone, her favorite jacket, the small backpack she used for day trips into the mountains. By 6 a.m., the family was searching the inn's property. By 7 a.m., they'd called the police. By noon, search and rescue teams were assembling at the trailhead she'd used since childhood. The one that wound through pine forests toward higher elevations where the air grew thin and the world fell silent. The lead search coordinator was a man named Derek Chen, a veteran with 20 years of experience finding lost hikers. He'd seen everything. People who wandered off trail and got disoriented. Elderly folks with dementia who walked into the wilderness. Even a few who'd gone into the mountains intending never to return. He approached every search with the same methodical precision, following protocols that had saved dozens of lives. But this case felt different from the start. Something about it didn't fit the usual patterns. The search dogs picked up her scent immediately at the trailhead. They followed it eagerly, pulling their handlers along the familiar path where pine needles cushioned every footstep, and morning mist clung to the trees like silk scarves. The dogs tracked her scent for exactly 2 miles, their noses pressed to the ground, their bodies tense with purpose. Then they stopped, all 3 dogs, independently, at the exact same spot. A clearing where the trail forked in 2 directions. One path led higher into the mountains. The other curved back toward town. The dogs circled the area, whining in confusion, their training telling them the scent should continue, but their noses finding nothing. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist at that precise location. Derek had seen scent trails go cold before. Rain could wash away traces. Strong winds could scatter them. Streams could break the trail if someone walked through water. But the weather had been calm that week. No rain, light winds, and the nearest stream was half a mile away. "It's like she vanished into thin air," one of the handlers said, his voice carrying an edge of unease that professionals rarely showed. They expanded the search radius. Volunteers arrived from neighboring towns, dozens of them, then hundreds. They formed lines and walked shoulder to shoulder through the forest, calling her name until their voices grew hoarse, searching for any sign that she'd passed through. Torn fabric on a branch, a dropped item, footprints in soft earth, anything. They found nothing, not a single trace beyond that 2-mile mark where the dogs had lost her scent. Helicopters circled overhead, their thermal cameras scanning the forest canopy for heat signatures that might indicate a person hiding or injured below. They covered hundreds of square miles, flying grid patterns with mathematical precision. The cameras detected deer, a black bear moving through underbrush, even a group of hikers camping illegally on protected land. But they didn't find her. On the 4th day, the police brought in a forensics team to examine her car, still parked at the trailhead. They found her fingerprints on the steering wheel, the door handle, the gear shift, exactly where you'd expect them. But they also found something else. In the trunk, carefully folded and placed in a plastic bag, was a change of clothes, clean underwear, a toothbrush, travel-sized toiletries. It was the kind of preparation someone made when they planned not to come back. Detective Sarah Morrison, the lead investigator assigned to the case, stood in the parking lot holding that plastic bag, feeling the weight of what it meant. This wasn't a woman who'd gotten lost on a familiar trail. This wasn't someone who'd had an accident or gotten disoriented. But why? And more importantly, where had she gone that even trained search dogs couldn't follow? The detective began interviewing everyone who'd seen her in those final days. The inn's guests remembered her as quiet but professional, always smiling even when her eyes looked tired. Her parents described a dutiful daughter who'd seemed stressed lately, but nothing more concerning than usual. Her sister spoke with concern, laced with something else. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication, as she mentioned the episodes, and suggested her sister might not have been thinking clearly. One interview stood out. A regular guest at the inn, an elderly man who visited every autumn, mentioned seeing her talking with another guest about a month before she vanished. An older woman, he said. They had breakfast together several mornings. Seemed like deep conversations, you know? The kind where you lean in close and speak quietly. Detective Morrison pulled the inn's registration records. She found the elderly woman's check-in. Room 307, 2 weeks, paid in cash, checked out 3 weeks before the disappearance. The name on the registration was Alice Green. The address was listed as Portland, Oregon. The detective called the Portland Police Department. They ran the name and address. The address didn't exist. Alice Green, at least the one from that registration, was a ghost. The family was growing desperate. They held press conferences, her mother's face pale and drawn as she begged for information. They printed thousands of flyers showing her smiling face, those flyers appearing in shop windows throughout the region. Local news stations ran the story. National media picked it up briefly before moving on to newer tragedies. Weeks became months. The active search was scaled back, then suspended. The case remained open, but resources shifted to newer emergencies, fresher leads, people who might still be saved. Her family held a memorial service without a body. They stood in the church where she'd been baptized, singing hymns while her empty casket sat at the altar draped in white flowers. Her mother sobbed. Her father stood rigid, his jaw clenched, refusing to cry. Her sister delivered a eulogy that praised her sacrifice and dedication, words that rang hollow to anyone who'd really known her. The town slowly stopped talking about her. Her face on the missing persons posters faded in the sun, the paper growing brittle and torn. The inn continued operating, her absence becoming just another empty room that no one mentioned. But Detective Morrison couldn't let it go. She kept the file on her desk, kept reviewing the evidence, kept asking the question that haunted her. How does someone disappear so completely in the age of cell phones and surveillance cameras and digital footprints? The answer, she would eventually discover, was more disturbing than she could have imagined. Because the woman hadn't just disappeared, she'd been helped to disappear. And the network that helped her had been operating in the shadows for years, helping dozens of people vanish from their lives, leaving behind nothing but questions and grief. But that discovery was still years away. For now, the case went cold. The search ended. And somewhere in the mountains, hidden from view, a young woman was beginning a new life in a place that didn't exist on any map. 5 years passed. The world moved on the way it always does, swallowing tragedies and spitting out new ones, forgetting the faces that once filled news broadcasts and social media feeds. Her missing persons case became just another file in a cabinet, another cold case that detectives would occasionally revisit during slow weeks, hoping for a breakthrough that never came. Her parents aged in ways that went beyond years. Her mother's hair turned completely white. Her father developed a tremor in his hands that doctors couldn't explain. The inn continued operating, but the light had gone out of it somehow, as if the building itself was mourning. Her sister took over most of the daily operations, exactly as she'd always wanted. But the victory tasted like ash in her mouth. Sometimes, late at night, she'd walk past her missing sister's old room and feel something cold settle over her. Guilt, maybe? Or the ghost of jealousy that had consumed her. The town had moved on. New families arrived, old ones left. The missing woman became a local legend, the kind of story people told tourists over drinks. The mysterious disappearance that was never solved, the woman who walked into the mountains and vanished like smoke. But in March 2023, everything changed because of a graduate student named Marcus Webb, who was studying wildlife migration patterns in the mountains 3 hours north of the coastal town. Marcus was 26 years old, pursuing his doctorate in environmental biology, spending his days tracking elk herds through remote wilderness areas. He'd been authorized to use drones to monitor animal movements across terrain too dangerous or difficult for humans to access regularly. His research focused on how elk adapted their migration routes in response to changing climate patterns and human encroachment. On March 14th, Marcus launched his drone from a ridge overlooking what his maps showed as uninhabited wilderness. The drone climbed into clear morning air, its camera recording in 4K resolution as it glided over pine forests that stretched endlessly toward distant peaks, still capped with winter snow. He was tracking a herd of elk that had moved off their usual path, following them through his controller screen as they navigated terrain that seemed impassable. The elk descended into a valley that wasn't supposed to exist, at least not according to his topographical maps, which showed that area as a continuous ridge with no break. But there it was on his screen, a hidden valley, protected on all sides by steep rock faces and thick forest, accessible only through a narrow passage that would be nearly impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. Marcus leaned forward, his coffee forgotten, his breath catching as the drone descended lower into the valley. What he saw there defied explanation. The valley wasn't empty wilderness. It was inhabited, Hand-built cabins constructed from local timber dotted the landscape. Their design so perfectly integrated with the environment that from above they looked almost like natural formations. Gardens laid out in careful rows showed vegetables growing in organized plots. Solar panels caught the morning light. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, lazy spirals. This was a community, a hidden settlement that existed completely off the grid, invisible to satellite imagery because of the dense forest canopy and the valley's unique geography that created natural blind spots in aerial surveillance. Marcus's hands trembled as he guided the drone lower, zooming in on details that his scientific mind struggled to process. This wasn't a few survivalists camping illegally on public land. This was organized, permanent, sustained. A functioning community that had existed for years without detection. How many people lived there? 10? 20? More? The drone glided over a central clearing where several structures surrounded what looked like a communal garden. And that's when Marcus saw her. A woman stood in the clearing, her back to the camera, tending to plants in a raised garden bed. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Something about her posture seemed focused, purposeful, like someone who'd found exactly where they belonged. Marcus was about to pilot the drone past her when she did something that made his blood run cold. She turned around, looked directly at the camera, and stood completely still, her face clearly visible, her expression unreadable as she stared into the lens from hundreds of feet below. It wasn't the startled reaction of someone accidentally discovered. It wasn't fear or surprise. It was something else entirely. Recognition, maybe, or resignation, as if she'd known this moment would eventually come. The drone hovered there for 30 seconds that felt like hours. The woman didn't move, didn't wave for help, didn't run. She simply stood there, looking up at the camera with an intensity that translated even through the digital feed. Then she did something stranger. She raised one hand, not in greeting, not in distress, and pressed it flat against her chest, over her heart. Held it there for 5 seconds. Then dropped it and walked calmly back toward one of the cabins, disappearing inside. Marcus's hands shook as he brought the drone back, his mind racing. That gesture, what did it mean? A warning? A message? A goodbye? He immediately copied the footage to his laptop, backed it up to cloud storage, and sat staring at the paused frame showing the woman's face. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place. He'd grown up in a city 3 hours south of where his research took place. He'd heard stories, legends, local mysteries the way everyone does, and then it clicked. He pulled up his browser, searching for missing persons cases from the region, scrolling through faces until he found her. The missing woman from 2018, the one who'd vanished without a trace 5 years ago. The search that had made national news before fading into obscurity. He compared the images side by side, the missing persons photo from 2018 and the screenshot from his drone footage. 5 years had passed. She looked older, her face thinner, her skin weathered by sun and wind. But the bone structure was identical. The shape of her eyes, the way she held herself. Marcus's first instinct was to call the police immediately. But something made him hesitate. That gesture she'd made, hand over heart, carried meaning he couldn't interpret. And the way she'd looked at the camera, so calm, so deliberate, suggested this wasn't a hostage situation or someone being held against their will. This was someone who'd chosen to be there. He spent 3 hours reviewing the footage frame by frame, mapping the valley's location with GPS coordinates, documenting everything he'd seen. The cabins numbered at least 15, suggesting a population of 20 to 30 people. The gardens were extensive and well-maintained. The solar panels indicated modern technology adapted to off-grid living. This wasn't primitive survival. This was intentional community building. Finally, he made the call. Not to local police, but to the detective who'd originally worked the missing woman's case. It took several transfers and a lot of explaining, but eventually he reached Detective Sarah Morrison, who'd retired from active duty but still consulted on cold cases. When he described what he'd found and sent her the footage, There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Webb," she finally said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need you to send me everything you have. Every frame of footage, every GPS coordinate, every note you've taken. And I need you to not share this with anyone else." "Not yet? Why?" Marcus asked. "If she's alive, if she's been there for 5 years—" "Because," Detective Morrison interrupted, "you've just stumbled onto something much bigger than one missing person. And if the wrong people find out what you've discovered, that woman and everyone else in that valley might disappear for real." Marcus felt cold spread through his chest. "What do you mean bigger? What is this place?" "That's what we're going to find out," the detective said. "But first I need to make some calls. And you need to promise me you'll keep this quiet until I tell you otherwise." Marcus agreed, but his mind was spinning with questions. What kind of place was this? Who were these people? And why would a detective be more concerned about protecting them than immediately organizing a rescue? He didn't know it yet, but his drone footage had just opened a door that powerful people had worked very hard to keep closed. A door to a network that had been operating in the shadows for decades, helping people disappear when they needed to escape lives that were killing them slowly, offering refuge to those who'd exhausted every other option. The missing woman wasn't the first person to find that valley, and she wouldn't be the last. But she might be the first whose secret was about to be exposed to the entire world. Detective Sarah Morrison hung up the phone with Marcus Webb and sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the drone footage frozen on her laptop screen. The woman's face looked back at her, older, weathered, but unmistakably alive. 5 years of searching, 5 years of questions, and here was the answer she'd both hoped for and dreaded. But Sarah's reaction wasn't what Marcus would have expected from a detective who just solved a major cold case. She didn't call the local police department. She didn't organize a rescue operation. Instead, she opened a locked drawer in her desk and pulled out a file she hadn't looked at in 3 years. A file that officially didn't exist. Sarah Morrison was 62 years old, months away from full retirement, with 38 years in law enforcement. She'd worked everything from domestic disputes to homicides, had seen humanity at its worst and occasionally at its best. But nothing in her career had prepared her for what she'd discovered during the missing woman's investigation 5 years ago. It started with Alice Green, the mysterious guest who'd checked into the inn a month before the disappearance. Sarah had traced that fake identity backward through layers of false addresses and dead ends, using investigative techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was technically legal. She'd called in favors from federal contacts, accessed databases she probably shouldn't have, followed digital breadcrumbs that kept disappearing the moment she found them. And eventually, she'd found something. Not Alice Green, that name was just one of dozens the woman had used, but a pattern. A pattern of people disappearing across the western United States over the past 20 years, all sharing certain characteristics. They were people in crisis, people who'd exhausted every other option, people whose lives had become unbearable, but who couldn't see a way out through conventional means. Abuse victims whose abusers were too powerful or too connected. Whistleblowers who'd been silenced and threatened. People crushed under debt they could never repay. Individuals whose families were slowly destroying them through obligation and expectation. One by one, they'd vanished. No bodies, no evidence of foul play. Just gone, as if they'd stepped through a door into another dimension. Local police had investigated each case independently, never connecting them because they occurred across different jurisdictions, different states, different circumstances. But Sarah had seen the pattern. And more disturbingly, she'd discovered that some of her own colleagues, people she'd worked with for decades, had quietly closed certain cases without the usual thorough investigation. 3 years ago, Sarah had received a visit at her home. Late at night, well past midnight, a knock at her door that made her reach for her service weapon before answering. A woman stood on her porch. Not Alice Green, but someone similar, carrying that same quality of existing outside normal society's boundaries. "Detective Morrison," the woman had said. her voice calm but firm. "We need to talk about the people you're looking for." They'd sat in Sarah's kitchen while the woman explained. She didn't give her real name. She didn't reveal specific locations. But she told Sarah enough to understand what was happening. There was a network, not a criminal organization, something else entirely. A loose collection of communities hidden in remote locations across the country, connected by trusted individuals who moved between the straight world and these shadow places. They helped people disappear when disappearing was the only way to survive. "Think of us as a railroad," the woman had said, her hands wrapped around the tea Sarah had mechanically prepared. Not unlike the Underground Railroad that helped slaves escape to freedom. Except we help people escape lives that are killing them slowly, legally, invisibly. Sarah's law enforcement instincts had screamed at her to arrest this woman, to force information, to expose everything. But something else, some deeper part of herself that had seen too many victims failed by the system, made her listen. "The people who come to us aren't criminals," the woman continued. "They're people who've tried everything else. They've called the police and been told there's nothing they can do. They've gotten restraining orders that their abusers ignore. They've sought help from social services that are too underfunded and overwhelmed to actually help. They've been crushed under medical debt that will follow them until death. They've been trapped in family obligations that are suffocating them." "So you help them fake their deaths?" Sarah asked, her voice hard. "No, we help them start over. New names, new lives, new chances. They live in communities where everyone understands the weight of the past they're carrying, where no one asks questions about what came before, where they can heal and rebuild themselves." "That's illegal," Sarah said. "Multiple felonies, identity fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy." "Yes," the woman agreed calmly. "It's illegal. So is letting people die slowly because the system is broken. So is forcing someone to stay in a life that's destroying them because society says they have obligations. We've made our choice about which laws matter more." The woman had placed a card on Sarah's kitchen table. No name, just a phone number written in pencil. "If you decide to expose us, you'll destroy something that saved hundreds of lives. If you decide to look the other way, you'll have this number if you ever encounter someone who needs an option the system can't provide." Then she'd left, disappearing into the night as quietly as she'd arrived. Sarah had spent weeks agonizing over what to do. The cop in her said, "Expose everything. Bring these people to justice. Let the legal system work." But the human in her, the one who'd held crying women, whose abusers walked free on technicalities, who'd watched good people destroyed by circumstances beyond their control, who'd seen the system fail over and over, couldn't quite bring herself to make that call. She'd kept the file, kept the number, and kept her silence. Now, staring at the drone footage of the missing woman standing alive in that hidden valley, Sarah faced the choice again. But this time it was more complicated. Because Marcus Webb had the footage. Because modern technology made secrets harder to keep. Because the world was different now than it had been 3 years ago. She opened her secure email and sent a message to an address she'd only used twice before. No names, no details, just "Contact needed. Urgent. Code 47. Within 20 minutes, her phone rang from a blocked number. "Detective Morrison," a man's voice said. Not the woman who'd visited her, but someone else from the network. "What's happened?" Sarah explained about the drone footage, about Marcus Webb, about the valley being exposed on camera in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed or hidden. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "How many people have seen the footage?" the man finally asked. "Just the researcher and me." He agreed to keep quiet. "But I don't know how long that will hold. He's young, idealistic. He thinks we should launch an immediate rescue operation." "It's not a rescue if no one wants to be saved," the man said quietly. "The people in that valley chose to be there. They're not prisoners. They're refugees from lives that were killing them." "I know that," Sarah said. "But the world won't see it that way. They'll see missing persons found alive. They'll see a hidden community. They'll see conspiracy. The media will descend on that place like locusts. The FBI will get involved. Everything you've built will be exposed. Then we need to prepare them, the man said. The people in the valley need to decide how they want to handle this. Some might choose to return to their old lives. Others might choose to go deeper underground. But it needs to be their choice. There's something else, Sarah said, her stomach nodding. The missing woman, when the drone found her, she looked directly at the camera. Made a gesture, hand over heart. What does that mean? Another long pause. It means she's ready, the man said softly. It's a signal we teach people when they first arrive. If they're ever found, if their location is ever compromised, hand over heart means I'm choosing to stay. I'm not being held against my will. This is where I want to be. Sarah felt something crack in her chest. All this time, everyone had assumed she was dead or being held captive. But she'd been free. She'd been choosing her own life, maybe for the first time ever. What do you need from me? Sarah asked. Time, the man said. We need time to evacuate anyone who wants to leave, to prepare those who want to stay for what's coming. Can you give us 48 hours before this goes public? Sarah thought about her career, about the oath she'd taken, about the laws she'd sworn to uphold. Then she thought about all the cases where following the rules had led to preventable tragedies, about the woman standing in that valley who'd been brave enough to choose herself over everyone else's expectations. 48 hours, she said. But after that, I can't stop what's coming. The researcher has the footage. Other people will see it. This is going to explode whether we want it to or not. 48 hours is enough, the man said. Thank you, Detective. The line went dead. Sarah sat alone in her office, the weight of what she'd just done settling over her like a heavy blanket. She'd just aided a conspiracy. She'd actively obstructed justice. She'd betrayed her badge and everything she'd built her career on. But she'd also protected people who'd needed protecting. She'd given them a chance to make their own choices about their futures. She'd chosen human compassion over blind adherence to rules that often served no one. In that hidden valley, people who'd vanished from their old lives were about to face a reckoning. The woman who'd disappeared 5 years ago was about to become visible again, whether she wanted to or not. And a secret that had protected hundreds of people for decades was about to be exposed to a world that might not understand or forgive. The clock was ticking, and Sarah Morrison had just bet everything on a choice she hoped she wouldn't regret. The message reached the valley 12 hours after Marcus Webb's drone had captured its existence. It came not through phones or internet, the community had neither, but through a man who arrived on foot just after sunset, carrying news that would force every resident to make an impossible choice. His name was Thomas, though that wasn't the name he'd been born with. He was one of the network's travelers, people who moved between the hidden communities and the outside world, carrying messages, supplies, and occasionally guiding new arrivals to their refuge. He'd hiked 8 hours through increasingly difficult terrain to reach the valley, driven by the urgency of what he carried. The community gathered in the central meeting hall, a large structure built from local timber with windows facing the mountains that had protected them for so long. 23 people sat in a circle, men and women ranging from their 20s to their 70s, each carrying stories they'd left behind, each having chosen this life over the one they'd fled. She sat among them, the woman who'd disappeared 5 years ago, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm even as Thomas explained what had happened. She'd expected this moment eventually. The hand-over-heart gesture she'd made to the drone hadn't been panic or impulse. It had been acceptance, 5 years of peace, 5 years of becoming herself. And now the reckoning she'd always known would come. Thomas stood in the center of the circle, his weathered face grave. A researcher's drone found you yesterday. He filmed the valley, filmed several of you working in the gardens. The footage is clear enough to identify faces. One of our contacts in law enforcement is buying us 48 hours, but after that, this place will be public knowledge. The room erupted in whispered conversations, fear rippling through people who'd thought they were finally safe. A woman in her 50s started crying silently, her hands shaking. A younger man stood abruptly, then sat back down, his face pale. These were people who'd already lost everything once. The thought of doing it again was unbearable. "What are our options?" asked an older man named David, who'd arrived at the valley 7 years ago, fleeing debt collectors who'd threatened his family. He'd become one of the community's leaders, someone others looked to for steady guidance. Thomas took a breath. "You can evacuate. We have other locations, deeper, more remote. The network will help anyone who wants to relocate. It'll be harder to reach, more isolated, but you'll remain hidden." "Or," someone asked from the back, "or you stay. You face whatever comes. Media attention, police investigations, possible legal consequences. Some of you might be forced to return to situations you fled. Others might face criminal charges for the fraud involved in your disappearances." Thomas paused, his eyes moving around the circle. "But some of you might also find that enough time has passed, that the people or situations you ran from have changed, or that you're strong enough now to face them." The missing woman, though she no longer thought of herself that way, hadn't for years, finally spoke. Her voice was steady, carrying a strength she'd never possessed in her old life. "This is my fault," she said. "I should have been more careful yesterday. I knew the drone was there. I could have hidden." "No," Thomas said firmly. "This was inevitable. Technology is advancing. Satellites are getting better. Hikers are going deeper into wilderness. We've kept these communities hidden for 2 decades, but that was always going to have an expiration date. This isn't anyone's fault. It's just reality catching up." A woman named Elena, who'd fled domestic violence 3 years ago, spoke up. "If we stay, what happens? Do we get arrested? Do they force us to go back?" "That depends," Thomas said. "Legally, you're all missing persons. You've committed identity fraud, which is a felony. But you're also victims who fled impossible situations. The network has lawyers ready to argue that you had no other choice, that the system failed you first. It's not guaranteed protection, but it's something." The group fell silent, each person wrestling with their own impossible decision: stay and face the consequences, or run again and lose everything they'd built here. She thought about her life in the valley, the garden she'd cultivated from bare earth, learning patience as seeds became sprouts, became food. The cabin she'd helped build with her own hands, every nail and board representing her choice to create rather than merely endure. The friendships she'd formed with people who understood loss and renewal because they'd lived it themselves. She thought about the person she'd been 5 years ago, hollow, exhausted, drowning in everyone else's needs while her own self withered. That woman had been dying slowly, politely, invisibly. Coming to the valley hadn't been running away. It had been running toward life. But she also thought about her parents, the pain she'd caused them, the uncertainty they'd lived with for 5 years. However complicated their relationship had been, they'd loved her in their own flawed, human way. And she'd loved them, even when that love felt like chains. "I want to stay," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I want to face whatever comes. Not because I think I did something wrong by coming here, but because I'm strong enough now to tell my truth. 5 years ago, I couldn't have done that. I would have folded under pressure, gone back, let them convince me I was selfish or crazy or wrong. But I'm different now." She looked around the circle at faces that had become family. "I don't regret coming here. This place saved my life. All of you saved my life. And if my story going public means the world learns about what we've built here, about people who were failed by every system that was supposed to protect them, who had to disappear just to survive, then maybe that's not a bad thing." David nodded slowly. "She's right. We've been hiding because we were afraid. But maybe it's time to stop being afraid. Maybe it's time to stand up and say, this is what the system forced us to do. This is what happens when you trap people in impossible situations with no legal way out." Others began speaking, sharing their thoughts, their fears, their hopes. The discussion went on for hours, voices rising and falling as the community grappled with a decision that would affect all their futures. By midnight, they'd reached a consensus. 14 people chose to evacuate, unwilling or unable to face what exposure might bring. Their situations were too dangerous, their pursuers too powerful, their legal jeopardy too severe. The network would move them to deeper sanctuaries where they could continue rebuilding their lives. 9 people, including her, chose to stay. They would face the cameras, the questions, the judgment. They would tell their stories, all of them, and let the world decide whether they were criminals or survivors. As the meeting dispersed, she walked outside into the cold night air. Stars scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black velvet. The same stars she'd looked at 5 years ago when she first arrived, terrified and determined and barely holding herself together. Thomas approached her, his expression grave. "You understand what you're choosing? Once your story goes public, there's no taking it back. Your family will know you've been alive all this time. The media will tear apart every decision you made. People will judge you without understanding what you were going through." "I know," she said, "but I also know who I am now, and that person is strong enough to survive whatever comes next." Thomas studied her face in the starlight. "5 years ago, when you first arrived here, you could barely look people in the eye. You apologized for existing. You flinched when anyone spoke loudly. Look at you now." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "That's what this place does. It gives people space to become who they were always meant to be." "Then make sure the world knows that," Thomas said. "Make sure they understand that we're not criminals harboring fugitives. We're people who created a solution when society failed to provide one. We're people who chose to live rather than slowly die in situations that were killing us." He handed her a phone, old, basic, but functional. "You have 48 hours before the researcher goes public with his footage. Use that time to prepare your story. Think about what you want to say to your family, to the police, to everyone who's been searching for you. Make it count." She took the phone, feeling its weight in her palm. 48 hours to prepare for a reckoning 5 years in the making. 48 hours to find words for experiences that existed beyond language. 48 hours before the world learned that the missing woman had never really been missing at all. She'd been finding herself in a place where lost people became whole. In her cabin that night, she sat by candlelight and began writing. Not an apology. She wouldn't apologize for choosing life over death, for choosing herself over everyone else's expectations. But an explanation, a story of suffocation and salvation, a testament to the hundreds of people who'd been forced to disappear because staying visible meant slow destruction. Outside, the valley settled into its usual peaceful silence. But everyone knew that silence was borrowed time, and soon the whole world would be listening to secrets they'd kept hidden in the mountains. The clock was ticking, and she was ready to speak her truth. Detective Sarah Morrison sat in her car outside the family inn, the same building she'd visited dozens of times 5 years ago during the initial investigation. The morning sun made the weathered siding glow golden, but the place still carried that haunted quality of a location marked by tragedy. She'd been dreading this moment since agreeing to give the valley 48 hours. In her laptop bag was a copy of Marcus Webb's drone footage. In her pocket was a recording device because this conversation would need to be documented, and in her chest was a knot of dread, because she was about to tell parents that their daughter had been alive all along, choosing not to come home. She found the mother in the kitchen, the same place where they'd first met 5 years ago when the search was just beginning. The woman had aged dramatically, her hair completely white now, deep lines carved around her mouth and eyes, her hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd learned to function while grieving. "Mrs. Chen," Sarah said quietly, "is your husband available? I need to speak with both of you." The mother's face went pale. In 5 years, she'd learned that visits from the detective meant news, and news was never good. Did you find—" "She's alive," Sarah said, the words coming out more bluntly than she'd intended. "Your daughter is alive. I've seen recent footage of her." The coffee mug the mother was holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor. Hot liquid spread across the ground, but she didn't seem to notice. She gripped the counter, her legs buckling, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "Alive?" The word came out strangled. "Where? Is she hurt? Is she being held somewhere? We need to—" "Please sit down," Sarah said gently, guiding her to a chair. "I'll get your husband." This is going to be complicated to explain. 10 minutes later, both parents sat at the kitchen table while Sarah set up her laptop. The father's face was unreadable, locked in that rigid control he'd maintained throughout the initial investigation. The mother couldn't stop crying, tears streaming silently down her face as her hands shook. Sarah played the drone footage, the valley appearing on screen, the hidden community, the gardens and cabins, and then their daughter, standing in the clearing, looking directly at the camera with that calm, deliberate expression before making the gesture, hand over heart, and walking away. The silence after the video ended was deafening. "I don't understand," the father finally said, his voice hollow. "She's been there all along? For 5 years? Living in some compound in the mountains while we thought she was dead?" "It's not a compound," Sarah said carefully. "It's a community of people who had no other options. People who were trapped in situations that were destroying them and who couldn't find help through legal channels." "What situation?" the mother said, her voice rising. "What was so terrible that she had to fake her death? That she had to let us suffer for 5 years thinking she was murdered or dead in some ravine? What kind of person does that to their family?" Sarah had prepared for this reaction. She'd known the parents would be hurt, angry, confused, but hearing the raw pain in the mother's voice still made her chest ache. "I need to ask you both some difficult questions," Sarah said, "and I need you to answer honestly, because your answers will help explain why she felt she had no other choice." She opened her notebook, though she'd memorized these questions during her sleepless night. "In the year before she disappeared, did you notice any changes in her behavior? Any signs she was struggling?" The parents exchanged glances. The father's jaw tightened. The mother looked away. "She was stressed," the mother admitted. "The inn was having financial problems. We were fighting a lot about money, but we all were stressed. That's not a reason to—" "Did she ever express feeling overwhelmed? Did she ever ask for help?" Another silence, longer this time. "She mentioned seeing a doctor," the father said reluctantly. "Said she was having these episodes where she'd lose time, couldn't remember how she got somewhere. We told her it was just exhaustion, that she needed to rest." "Did you give her time to rest?" The father's face flushed. "We couldn't afford to hire extra help. The inn needed her." "What about her emotional state?" Sarah pressed. "Did she seem depressed? Anxious? Did she talk about feeling trapped?" The mother's tears came harder now. "She was always dramatic, always too sensitive. She took everything so personally. We told her she needed to toughen up, stop being so emotional all the time." Sarah felt her professional detachment cracking. "Mrs. Chen, your daughter wasn't being dramatic. She was drowning. And when she reached out for help, you told her to toughen up and keep working." "We didn't know," the mother sobbed. "How were we supposed to know it was that bad?" "Because she told you," Sarah said, her voice harder now. "Maybe not in those exact words, but she told you in every way someone can tell you they're not okay. And you didn't listen because listening would have meant acknowledging that the inn, the family expectations, all of it was crushing her." The father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're blaming us? Our daughter disappeared. Let us think she was dead for 5 years, and you're saying it's our fault." "I'm saying she felt she had no other choice," Sarah said. "I'm saying that sometimes people reach a point where the only way to survive is to disappear completely. And I'm saying that before you judge her for that choice, you need to understand what drove her to it." She pulled out a folder, one she'd compiled from her original investigation and new information from the network. Did you know that 3 months before she disappeared, her sister was spreading rumors about her mental stability? Positioning herself to take over the inn management by suggesting your daughter was unreliable? The mother's face went white. No, that's not. Sarah wouldn't. Your other daughter, Sarah clarified. The one who's running this place now. The one who saw an opportunity and took it. The father sat back down heavily. His rigid control was cracking, emotions bleeding through in ways he clearly didn't know how to process. Did you know she found a letter from her grandmother? Sarah continued. The grandmother you all held up as a saint. She discovered that her grandmother had wanted to leave this town once, had dreams of becoming an artist, but the family convinced her to stay and sacrifice those dreams. That's not the same thing, the mother said weakly. Isn't it? Your daughter saw her entire future written in that letter. Another woman whose dreams would be sacrificed for family duty. Another generation of women told to be grateful for the privilege of slowly disappearing into other people's needs. The room fell silent, except for the mother's quiet weeping. The father stared at the frozen image on the laptop screen. His daughter's face, older but somehow more alive than he'd seen her look in years. What happens now? He finally asked. In about 36 hours, this footage goes public, Sarah said. The researcher who found her has agreed to wait, but he won't wait forever. Once it's out, there will be media attention, police investigation, probably federal involvement. Your daughter and 8 others from that community have chosen to stay and face whatever comes. They're going to tell their stories publicly. They're going to make us look like monsters, the mother said bitterly. They're going to tell the truth, Sarah corrected. What people do with that truth is up to them. But yes, your family dynamics will be scrutinized. People will ask why a daughter felt she had to fake her death to escape her family. Those questions won't be comfortable. The father's hands were shaking now, his carefully maintained control finally shattering. Can we see her before it goes public? Can we talk to her? Sarah had anticipated this request. She's written you a letter. I have it here. She's not ready to see you face to face yet. But she wanted you to understand, in her own words, why she made the choice she did. She pulled the envelope from her bag. The mother reached for it with trembling hands, but the father stopped her. Wait, he said. Before we read it, I need to say something. His voice cracked. I think we knew, not consciously, but somewhere deep down, we knew she was suffering. We knew we were asking too much. We knew the inn was destroying her. But we didn't want to see it, because seeing it would have meant making difficult changes. Would have meant admitting we'd failed her. The mother was sobbing openly now. I just wanted her to be strong. Like her grandmother. Like I had to be. I thought I was teaching her resilience, but I was breaking her. Read the letter, Sarah said quietly. And then you need to decide what you're going to say when the world asks you about your missing daughter who chose to disappear rather than keep living the life. You wanted her to live. She left them alone, with the letter, walking out to her car where she sat for a long moment, emotionally exhausted. In 36 hours, this story would explode across national news. A missing woman found alive in a hidden community. A network that helped people disappear. Families confronting painful truths about the harm they'd caused. And at the center of it all, a woman who'd been brave enough to choose herself when everyone else wanted her to choose obligation. A woman who'd died to one life so she could finally live another. The reckoning was coming, and nobody, not the family, not the Valley residents, not even Sarah herself, was truly ready for what it would unleash. The envelope sat on the kitchen table between them, plain white paper with no return address, just their names written in handwriting they'd know anywhere. Their daughter's careful script, slightly slanted to the right, the way she'd learned in elementary school and never changed. The mother's hands shook as she reached for it. The father covered her hand with his, stopping her one more time. Whatever she says in there, he said, his voice rough. We read it all. We don't stop halfway through, because it hurts. We owe her that much." The mother nodded, tears already streaming down her face before she'd even opened the envelope. She slid her finger under the flap, tearing it carefully, as if the paper itself was precious. Inside were 3 pages, front and back, filled with their daughter's handwriting. They read together, their heads close. The only sound in the kitchen, the ticking of the old clock on the wall, and the mother's quiet weeping. "Seat." The mother finished reading first, her hands trembling so badly the paper shook. She set it down carefully on the table and covered her face with her hands, sobbing with the kind of grief that comes from confronting truths you've spent years avoiding. The father read more slowly, his jaw clenched, his breathing carefully controlled. When he finished, he folded the letter with precise movements and placed it back in the envelope. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ocean they'd built their entire lives around. "She's right," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "So, about all of it. We knew she was drowning, and we just kept piling more weight on top of her because it was easier than admitting we were failing." The mother's sobs grew harder. "I thought I was teaching her to be strong. Like I had to be strong. Like my mother had to be strong. I didn't know I was just passing down trauma." "We have 36 hours, the father said, still staring out the window. 36 hours before the media turns our family inside out. Before everyone knows that our daughter chose to disappear rather than keep living with us." He turned to face his wife, and for the first time in the 5 years since their daughter vanished, his carefully maintained control completely shattered. Tears streamed down his face. "We have 36 hours to decide who we want to be when they start asking questions. Do we defend ourselves? Make excuses? Blame her for being too sensitive?" His voice cracked. "Or do we tell the truth? That we failed her. That we prioritized the in over her well-being. That we saw her suffering and told her to work harder instead of helping her heal." The mother looked up at him, her face ravaged by tears. "If we tell the truth, we lose everything. The inn's reputation, our standing in the community. People will hate us." "We already lost everything," he said quietly. "We lost our daughter 5 years ago. We just didn't know it yet. In 36 hours, the world would be watching, and the family would have to decide whether they had the courage to face the truth they'd spent 5 years running from." Sarah Chen, the younger sister, the one who'd stayed behind when their older sibling vanished, was in the inn's office when her parents came to find her. She was reviewing reservation books, planning summer schedules, doing the work she'd taken over 5 years ago when her sister disappeared and left a vacuum she'd been quick to fill. She looked up when they entered, immediately noticing something was wrong. Her father's eyes were red. Her mother looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single morning, and both of them were staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something between grief and accusation. "What happened?" she asked, closing the reservation book. Is there news?" "She's alive," her mother said, her voice flat, emotionless from exhaustion. "Your sister is alive. She's been living in a hidden community in the mountains for 5 years." Sarah's face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Shock, confusion, relief, and then something else. Something that looked almost like fear. That's incredible. When is she coming home? Where is she? Can we see her?" "She's not coming home," her father said quietly. "And before we talk about any of that, we need to talk about something else. Something the detective told us." He pulled out a folder that Sarah had never seen before. Detective Morrison's notes from the original investigation, plus new information she'd compiled over the years. He opened it slowly, deliberately, watching his younger daughter's face. "Did you spread rumors about your sister before she disappeared?" he asked. "Rumors about her being unstable? About her having mental health problems that made her unreliable?" The blood drained from Sarah's face. I was concerned about her. She was having those episodes, losing time. I thought people should know." "You thought people should know," her mother interrupted, her voice sharp. "Or you thought it would make you look more capable. More reliable? More deserving of running the inn? Sarah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. That's not fair. I was worried about her. We all were. She was clearly struggling, and you two weren't doing anything about it. You weren't worried, her father said, his voice harder than Sarah had ever heard it. You were competing. You saw an opportunity to position yourself as the better daughter, and you took it. That's not true, Sarah said, but her voice wavered. I loved her. I wanted to help. Then why? Her mother said, pulling out another document. Did you tell Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store that your sister was becoming increasingly erratic? Why did you mention to the Johnsons that you were concerned about her ability to handle responsibility? Why did you plant seeds of doubt about her competence all over this town? Sarah's hands trembled. I didn't. It wasn't like that. I was just being honest about what I was seeing. You were sabotaging her, her father said quietly, systematically, carefully, making sure that when she finally broke under the pressure we were all putting on her, everyone would think it was her fault, that she was weak or unstable, not that we'd pushed her too hard. Sarah sank back into her chair, her face pale. The carefully constructed justifications she'd been telling herself for 5 years were crumbling under her parents' steady gaze. I didn't know she would disappear, she whispered. I didn't know it would go that far. But you're glad she did, her mother said, and it wasn't a question. Aren't you? You got everything you wanted. You got to run the inn. You got to be the dependable daughter. You got to be first in our eyes for the first time in your life. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, in a place she'd never wanted to examine too closely, her mother was right. She'd spent her entire childhood in her older sister's shadow. The responsible one, the empathetic one, the one who stayed when Sarah wanted to leave, who helped when Sarah wanted to rebel, who absorbed everyone's problems while Sarah got to be young and selfish and free. And Sarah had resented her for it, had resented the way their parents praised her sacrifice, the way the town admired her dedication, the way everyone expected Sarah to be more like her perfect older sister. When the episode started, when her sister began showing cracks in that perfect facade, Sarah had seen an opening, not consciously. She'd never admitted it to herself that clearly, but she'd seen a chance to finally step out of that shadow and into the light. So she'd whispered, carefully crafted concerns that sounded like love but functioned like poison, planted doubt in just the right places, made sure people started wondering if maybe the perfect daughter wasn't so perfect after all. And when her sister disappeared, when the search came up empty and the months turned into years and everyone assumed she was dead, Sarah had mourned publicly while privately feeling something else. Relief, maybe, or vindication. The terrible freedom of finally being seen. I didn't want her to die, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face now. I never wanted that. I wanted to matter. I wanted you to look at me the way you looked at her. I wanted to be enough. So you destroyed her, her father said. You took someone who was already drowning and you held her head underwater. All so you could be the one standing on shore looking heroic. I didn't know, Sarah sobbed. I didn't know she was that bad. I thought she was just stressed. I thought she was being dramatic like she always was. I didn't know she would actually leave, her mother finished. Fake her death? Choose to make us believe she was gone forever rather than stay in a family that was slowly destroying her? Sarah couldn't speak. The guilt she'd been pushing down for 5 years was erupting like a volcano, burning through all the justifications and rationalizations she'd built to protect herself from the truth. There's more, her father said. He pulled out another page from the folder. The detective found something interesting in her investigation. 3 weeks before your sister disappeared, you met with the bank manager, discussed your sister's instability, and suggested that maybe you should be added to the inn's financial accounts, just in case something happened to her. Sarah's head snapped up. I was trying to help. I was trying to make sure the inn would be protected if she... If she what? Her mother asked coldly. If she finally broke under the pressure you were helping to create? If she had a complete mental breakdown and needed to be institutionalized? Were you planning ahead, Sarah? Making sure that when she fell apart, you'd be positioned to catch the pieces? No, Sarah said, but the word came out weak, unconvincing even to herself. Because yes, she had been planning ahead, not consciously plotting her sister's destruction, but certainly preparing for a future where her sister was gone and she was in control, and some terrible part of her had been hoping that future would arrive sooner rather than later. In 36 hours, her father said, this story goes public. The media is going to dig into everything. The family dynamics, the pressure, the rumors. They're going to find out what you did, how you contributed to pushing your sister to the point where disappearing felt like her only option. Sarah felt like the walls were closing in. What do I do? How do I fix this? You can't fix it, her mother said harshly. You can't undo 5 years of our family being destroyed. You can't undo the pain you caused. You can't bring back the daughter we lost. But she's alive, Sarah said desperately. She's alive, and she's coming back. And we can make things right. We can be a family again. She's not coming back, her father said. And even if she wanted to, why would she? Why would she come back to a family where her own sister sabotaged her? Where her parents ignored her suffering? Where staying meant slowly dying? He stood, his face harder than Sarah had ever seen it. You have 36 hours to decide what you're going to say when the reporters start asking questions. You can lie, make excuses, protect yourself, or you can do what your sister is doing. Tell the truth, no matter how much it costs you. The truth will destroy me, Sarah whispered. The truth should destroy you, her mother said coldly. You destroyed your sister. The least you can do is have the courage to face the consequences. They left her alone in the office, surrounded by ledgers and reservation books, and all the responsibility she'd coveted for so long. It felt hollow now, meaningless. She'd won the prize she'd wanted, but the cost had been her sister's life and her own soul. Outside the office window, the ocean rolled endlessly against the shore, indifferent to human drama, indifferent to the ways families destroyed each other in the name of love and competition, and unexamined resentment. In 36 hours, the world would learn about a woman who'd disappeared rather than stay in a toxic family. And part of that story would be the sister who'd helped make that family unbearable, who'd chosen her own ambition over her sister's survival. Sarah sat alone with that knowledge, feeling the weight of 5 years of choices pressing down on her like stones. She'd wanted to matter. She'd wanted to be seen. She'd wanted to be enough. And in pursuing those wants, she'd lost everything that actually mattered, including the sister she'd never admitted, even to herself, that she'd loved all along. The 48 hours were up. Marcus Webb sat in his apartment, his finger hovering over the upload button that would send the drone footage to every major news outlet he'd compiled in a contact list. His academic advisor had called twice that morning, demanding to know why he hadn't submitted his research data yet. His roommate kept asking if he was okay, noting how he'd barely slept or eaten in 2 days. He thought about Detective Morrison's request for time, thought about the woman in the valley looking directly at the camera with that calm, deliberate expression, thought about the lives that would be irrevocably changed the moment he pressed this button. But he also thought about the truth, about transparency, about the fact that this was a story the world deserved to know, a hidden community, a network helping people disappear, a woman who'd been presumed dead for 5 years, living freely in the mountains. He pressed upload. Within 30 minutes, his phone started ringing. News stations, podcasters, true crime bloggers, journalists from national publications. They all wanted the footage, wanted interviews, wanted to be first with the story that was already spreading across social media like wildfire. Marcus had sent the footage to 5 major news outlets simultaneously, trying to prevent any single organization from controlling the narrative. But he hadn't anticipated how quickly it would explode. Within 2 hours, the drone footage was everywhere. Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, Instagram. People were analyzing every frame, zooming in on faces, speculating wildly about what this hidden community was and why it existed. The missing woman's face from 2018 was pulled from old news archives and compared side by side with screenshots from the drone footage. True crime communities that had followed her disappearance for years erupted with theories. Was she being held captive? Was this a cult? Had she been brainwashed? By noon, news vans were arriving at the coastal town where she'd disappeared from. Reporters knocked on doors, interviewed neighbors, dug through old records. They descended on the family inn like locusts, cameras pointed at windows, microphones thrust at anyone who entered or left. Inside, the family was barricaded. The father had locked all the doors, closed all the curtains, unplugged the landline that wouldn't stop ringing. They sat together in the living room, mother, father, and younger daughter, watching their private tragedy become public entertainment on every news channel. Breaking news: missing woman found alive after 5 years. Drone footage reveals hidden community in remote mountains. Shocking discovery: woman who vanished in 2018 spotted in off-grid settlement. Mystery deepens. Who are the people living in this secret valley? And how many more missing persons might be there? The younger sister, Sarah, watched her own face flash across the screen as reporters showed old family photos, describing the devoted family that had never given up hope. The irony burned like acid in her throat. She'd spent the past 36 hours wrestling with her conscience, and now the decision was being made for her. The truth was coming out whether she was ready or not. Their mother sat rigid on the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "They're going to destroy us," she whispered. "They're going to tear apart everything we've built." "We destroyed it ourselves," the father said quietly, his eyes fixed on the television. "They're just showing the world what we did." A knock came at the door. Heavy, official. The father went to answer it and found Detective Morrison standing there, 2 other officers behind her. "We need to talk," she said. Official statement. "The FBI is getting involved now that this has gone national. They want to know about the network, about how many people might be in these hidden communities, whether there's been any criminal activity." "Can they force her to come back?" the mother asked desperately. "Can they make her come home?" Detective Morrison's expression was carefully neutral. "She's an adult who left voluntarily. No crime was committed against her. The only potential crimes are the identity fraud involved in her disappearance and the operation of the network itself. But those investigations will take time." She paused, then added more gently, "She's prepared a statement. She's going to give an interview. Her choice of journalist, her terms. She wants to tell her story before everyone else tells it for her. I thought you should know." The family fell silent. Their daughter, who'd been too afraid to speak up 5 years ago, was about to tell the world exactly why she'd disappeared. 300 miles away, in the hidden valley that was no longer hidden, she sat across from journalist Catherine Mills. Catherine was known for her sensitive handling of difficult stories, for letting subjects speak in their own words rather than sensationalizing trauma. She'd agreed to come alone, no camera crew, just a voice recorder and notepad. The other 8 residents who'd chosen to stay stood nearby, offering silent support. They'd all agreed that she would be the one to speak first, to set the narrative, to explain what this place was before the world decided for them. "Are you ready?" Catherine asked gently. She nodded. 5 years ago, she couldn't have done this. She would have frozen, apologized, made herself small. But she wasn't that person anymore. "I want to start by saying that I'm not a victim," she began, her voice steady. "I know that's what people will want to believe, that I was kidnapped or brainwashed or held against my will. It's easier to believe that than to accept the truth. I chose this. I chose to disappear because staying in my old life was killing me, and I couldn't see any other way to survive. Catherine listened intently as she told her story. The pressure, the expectations, the slow suffocation of being needed by everyone while no one saw that she was drowning. The letter from her grandmother, the sister's betrayal, the elderly woman who'd offered her coordinates to another life. The day I left, she continued, I wasn't running away from responsibility. I was running toward the possibility of becoming a person instead of just a function. Does that make sense? In my old life, I wasn't a whole human being with needs and dreams and boundaries. I was a machine that produced service for other people. And when that machine started breaking down, everyone just wanted it fixed so it could keep working. How did you find this place? Catherine asked. She explained about the network, carefully avoiding details that might expose others who weren't ready to be found. It's not a cult. It's not criminal. It's a refuge for people who've exhausted every legal option and are still trapped in situations that are destroying them. Some people stay for a few months while they heal and figure out their next steps. Others, like me, build new lives here. Do you regret the pain you caused your family? She was quiet for a long moment. I regret that they were hurt. But I don't regret choosing to live. My family had years to see that I was suffering and years to do something about it. They chose not to, so I made a different choice. And yes, that caused them pain. But staying would have eventually killed me, either literally or in every way that matters. What do you want people to understand about your decision? I want them to understand that sometimes the system fails people. Sometimes there is no legal recourse, no official help, no safe way out through conventional means. And when that happens, people shouldn't have to choose between staying in situations that are destroying them or dying. There should be another option. This place, this network, it's that other option. She looked directly at Catherine. I also want people to understand that I'm not sorry for surviving. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, but I won't apologize for choosing life over obligation. And if that makes me selfish in their eyes, I can live with that, because at least I'm living. The interview continued for 2 hours. She answered every question honestly, holding nothing back. When it was over, Catherine sat back, her expression thoughtful. This is going to be controversial, she said. There will be people who understand and support you, but there will also be people who condemn you, who say you took the coward's way out, who accuse you of being selfish and cruel. I know, she said calmly, but for everyone who condemns me, there might be one person who sees themselves in my story. One person who realizes they don't have to slowly die to make other people comfortable. One person who understands that choosing yourself isn't selfishness. It's survival. And that's worth the condemnation. Catherine packed up her recording equipment. The article will run tomorrow morning. Once it does, there's no taking it back. Are you sure you're ready? She thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago, terrified, apologetic, drowning in everyone else's needs. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, clear, unapologetic about taking up space in the world. I'm ready, she said. The article dropped at 6 a.m. the next morning. By 7 a.m. it had been shared 10,000 times. By noon, it was trending on every social media platform. By evening, the story had reached millions of people around the world. The response was exactly as divided as Catherine had predicted. Some people called her brave, called her a survivor, called her an inspiration. They shared their own stories of being trapped in impossible situations, of considering disappearing themselves, of understanding exactly why she'd made the choice she did. Others called her selfish, cruel, a coward. They said she'd traumatized her family unnecessarily, that she should have tried harder to work things out, that there's always another way if you just try hard enough. They couldn't imagine a situation dire enough to justify what she'd done, but the conversation had started, and that was what mattered. And for the first time, the world was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the only way to save your own life is to disappear from it completely. The FBI investigation moved quickly. Within weeks, agents had mapped a network spanning 7 states, 2 decades of operation, hundreds of disappeared people. Special Agent Rebecca Torres led the case, and the files on her desk told impossible stories. Abuse victims whose police reports were ignored. Whistleblowers blacklisted from entire industries. People destroyed by systems meant to protect them. These aren't criminals, her junior agent said. These are people we failed. Federal charges were filed against 7 network organizers. But something unexpected happened. Public opinion exploded. A hashtag emerged, "I would disappear too." Millions shared stories of being trapped with no legal escape. The conversation grew too loud to ignore. She became the face of it all. In interviews, she never apologized. When every door is locked, sometimes you have to break through the wall to survive. Her family faced their reckoning publicly. Her parents admitted their failures on camera. Her father crying, her mother's voice breaking. "We destroyed her trying to keep her." Her sister Sarah confessed everything. The sabotage, the rumors, the betrayal. The internet was merciless, but Sarah didn't defend herself. "I benefited from my sister's pain. The least I can do is tell the truth." The legal case dragged on, but prosecutors quietly backed down. Charges were reduced, plea deals offered. The network officially disbanded, though everyone knew the work continued, just deeper underground. 6 months later, she returned to face her family. They met in a park overlooking the ocean. "I don't forgive you," she told her sister. "Not yet, maybe never, but I'm done carrying your guilt." To her parents, "I needed you to see me as a person, not a function. Maybe you can now, maybe it's too late, but I'm here to say goodbye to what was broken." Her mother reached for her hand. "Wait, can we try? Start over? Maybe, someday, when I'm ready. On my terms." She walked away lighter, not because they'd reconciled, but because she'd finally spoken her truth without apologizing for surviving. The valley was dismantled, but its people scattered to new refuges. She moved to a small town 2 states away, built a life under her real name, stopped hiding. She didn't need to anymore. The story became a turning point. Laws were proposed, systems questioned. Nothing changed overnight, but something shifted. People started asking better questions. Not why did she leave, but what made staying impossible. Years later, when asked if she regretted her choice, she always answered the same. "I regret it was necessary, but I don't regret surviving." She'd learned that love sometimes means letting go of people who won't let you breathe. That strength isn't enduring what breaks you. It's having the courage to walk away. That choosing yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is not existing at all. Not the disappearance, but the reclaiming. Not the loss, but the finding. Not the ending, but the beginning of a life finally lived on her own terms.